Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into a topic that has shaken the world and sent shockwaves through the Kremlin. Mass protests erupting across Russia and what they mean for Vladimir Putin, one of the most powerful leaders of our time. For decades, Putin has maintained a tight grip on Russia, projecting strength, control, and unshakable authority. Yet, despite his carefully crafted image, he faces a challenge that he cannot easily suppress. These protests are not just spontaneous events. They are a manifestation of growing frustration among ordinary Russians who have endured economic hardships, political repression, and a sense that their voices are no longer being heard. The images and reports coming from the streets tell a story of courage, resilience, and the unyielding desire for change. People from all walks of life are stepping out to challenge the status quo, risking imprisonment, intimidation, and personal harm. This is Putin's worst nightmare, an uprising of ordinary citizens whose determination cannot be ignored or silenced with simple rhetoric or state propaganda. The roots of this unrest are complex. For years, Russia has faced mounting economic difficulties, exacerbated by international sanctions, rising inflation, and a widening wealth gap. Ordinary citizens feel the pinch, from the cost of essential goods to the dwindling quality of life. Meanwhile, Putin has invested heavily in projecting power internationally, often prioritizing military adventures and geopolitical maneuvers over domestic well-being. This disconnect between the leadership and the everyday realities of Russian citizens has created fertile ground for dissent. Many are questioning why they must bear the brunt of economic instability while the political elite continues to thrive. Social media and independent journalism, despite heavy censorship, have played a crucial role in amplifying these frustrations, showing the world the scale of discontent brewing in cities and towns across the country. The nature of these protests is also significant. Unlike previous demonstrations that were largely localized or symbolic, the current wave has spread across multiple regions simultaneously, indicating a coordinated awareness among citizens that change requires collective action. In Moscow's St. Petersburg, and other major cities, thousands have gathered in defiance of strict laws against public assembly, often chanting slogans that directly criticize Putin and his administration. In smaller towns, citizens are organizing their own marches, sharing information, and creating networks of solidarity. What makes this movement particularly alarming for the Kremlin is its persistence. Protesters are not dispersing after a single day. They are returning, adapting their tactics, and finding new ways to make their voices heard, despite arrests and police crackdowns. This determination reflects a deeper shift in public sentiment, signaling that ordinary Russians are no longer willing to accept the narrative imposed by state-controlled media. Moreover, these protests are tapping into a broader historical context. Russia has a long history of popular movements challenging the authority of those in power, from the revolutions of the early 20th century to the political unrest in the post-Soviet period. What sets the current situation apart is the immediacy of the grievances and the digital tools at the protesters' disposal. Social media platforms, messaging apps, and encrypted channels allow for rapid organization, information sharing, and mobilization on an unprecedented scale. This makes it much harder for the state to contain dissent compared to earlier eras, when controlling information flow was simpler. The Kremlin recognizes this threat, and their responses, ranging from propaganda campaigns to the deployment of security forces, reflect both concern and a degree of uncertainty about how to effectively manage a movement that is decentralized and highly adaptable. The international community is watching closely. Analysts, journalists, and foreign governments are carefully tracking the developments, understanding that a Russia destabilized from within could have global repercussions. Economically, instability in Russia could affect energy markets, trade, and investment. Politically, any weakening of Putin's authority could shift the balance of power in the region, influencing conflicts and alliances. For Putin himself, these protests strike at the core of his image as an untouchable leader. Every rally, every chant, every viral video of citizens demanding accountability undermines the narrative of control he has cultivated for decades. The psychological impact cannot be underestimated. Leaders who have grown accustomed to unquestioned authority face a profound challenge when citizens openly defy them in ways that resonate with international audiences. At the heart of the movement are ordinary Russians who have reached a breaking point. They are mothers and fathers worried about the future of their children, young professionals struggling to build careers in a challenging economy, students seeking freedom of expression, and retirees concerned about pensions and health care. These protests are not limited to a single demographic or social class. They cut across age, profession, and geography, highlighting widespread dissatisfaction. Many participants emphasize that their goal is not chaos but accountability, transparency, and a government that prioritizes the needs of its citizens over its own interests. This speaks volumes about the growing political consciousness within Russia, where individuals are increasingly willing to question authority and demand reforms, even in the face of significant personal risk. Putin's response has been both calculated and revealing. Security forces have been deployed in key areas, demonstrators have been detained, and state media has sought to frame the protests as misguided or influenced by foreign actors. Yet, such measures may only fuel further resentment. History shows that attempts to suppress widespread discontent through force often backfire, creating martyrs and galvanizing movements rather than quelling them. The current situation demonstrates a delicate balancing act for the Kremlin, showing strength without provoking a backlash so severe that it spirals beyond control. Every decision, from public statements to arrests, is scrutinized by both domestic and international audiences, making the stakes extraordinarily high. Another key factor is the role of technology and independent journalism. Despite strict media controls, information about protests, detentions, and government actions spreads quickly through online platforms. Videos and first-hand accounts are shared globally, exposing the disconnect between official narratives and lived realities. This not only emboldens protesters, but also places additional pressure on the Russian government, as international observers and human rights organizations call attention to abuses and demand accountability. The transparency enabled by technology is a double-edged sword for Putin. While he can attempt to control messaging, the sheer volume and immediacy of information make it nearly impossible to completely suppress dissenting voices. The economic angle cannot be ignored. Russia's economy has faced persistent challenges, including inflation, reduced foreign investment, and sanctions that impact critical sectors. Citizens feel these pressures directly, leading to frustration and anger directed at leadership. While Putin has attempted to showcase international achievements, such as military interventions or diplomatic maneuvers, the daily struggles of ordinary Russians create a growing disconnect between perception and reality. When citizens perceive that their needs are secondary to the ambitions of a few, the legitimacy of the government is called into question. Mass protests in this context are as much about survival and fairness as they are about political ideology. Furthermore, the persistence and organization of these protests indicate a new level of political sophistication among the population. Unlike sporadic demonstrations in the past, today's movements are coordinated with clear messages and strategies. Participants understand that visibility, both nationally and internationally, is key to maintaining momentum. This reflects a nuanced understanding of modern activism, where media coverage, digital engagement, and strategic messaging are as important as physical presence on the streets. For Putin, this represents a particularly challenging scenario. He faces an opposition that is intelligent, adaptable, and capable of sustaining pressure over time. In addition, the symbolic aspect of these protests carries weight. Public demonstrations against Putin are not merely acts of defiance, they are statements of national concern, expressing the collective voice of citizens who believe that their country deserves better leadership and governance. The courage displayed by ordinary Russians who face potential legal repercussions and state intimidation resonates deeply with audiences inside and outside the country. Each rally, each banner, and each chant serves as a reminder that despite decades of control, the spirit of dissent and the demand for accountability remain alive. This symbolism magnifies the impact of protests, transforming localized events into a narrative of nationwide significance. International reactions further amplify the pressure. Global leaders and organizations have condemned crackdowns, expressed support for democratic principles, and monitored developments closely. This external attention adds another layer of complexity for Putin, as any heavy-handed response is likely to attract condemnation, sanctions, or diplomatic consequences. At the same time, the global spotlight empowers protesters, providing a sense of legitimacy and encouraging continued action. This dynamic demonstrates the interconnectedness of domestic unrest and international perception, where internal movements have far-reaching implications beyond national borders. Putin's image as a strategic and unflappable leader is also being tested. For years, he has cultivated a persona of strength, decisiveness, and unwavering control. Mass protests directly challenge this carefully maintained image, portraying him as a leader increasingly at odds with his people. Every report of demonstrators challenging authority chips away at the narrative of invincibility. The psychological impact on both the leader and the populace is significant, as it reshapes the perception of power from one of absolute control to one that is contested and potentially fragile. For Putin, maintaining authority in the face of widespread civil unrest is a daunting task, as every misstep can escalate tensions and inspire further mobilization. The resilience of protesters is remarkable. Despite arrests, intimidation, and harsh penalties, participants continue to organize, strategize, and communicate. They understand the risks, but are driven by a sense of moral and civic responsibility. Their persistence demonstrates a fundamental shift in the relationship between the Russian state and its citizens, where compliance is no longer automatic and the demand for transparency, fairness, and accountability takes precedence. This shift is perhaps the most profound threat to Putin, as it signals a long-term transformation in societal attitudes that cannot be easily reversed or suppressed. At the core, these protests are about more than individual grievances. They represent a collective demand for systemic change. Citizens are challenging policies, economic mismanagement, and political repression, calling for a government that truly serves its people. This broad-based critique highlights a growing awareness and engagement among the population, which could have lasting implications for the future of Russian politics. The movement is evolving into a platform for dialogue, advocacy, and potentially reform, as participants articulate not only what they oppose, but also what they envision for their country. In conclusion, the eruption of mass protests across Russia represents a critical moment in the country's history. For Vladimir Putin, it is a confrontation with his deepest fears: the loss of control, the questioning of legitimacy, and the empowerment of ordinary citizens to challenge authority. These protests are fueled by economic hardship, political repression, and a desire for accountability, and they demonstrate an unprecedented level of organization, resilience, and courage. They are amplified by technology, social media, and international attention, making them difficult to ignore or suppress. Putin faces a complex and high-stakes situation where every decision has profound implications for his leadership, the stability of Russia, and the perception of the country on the global stage. The determination of citizens, the symbolic weight of their actions, and the international scrutiny combine to create a scenario that is both unprecedented and transformative. As the situation unfolds, one thing is clear: the spirit of dissent and the demand for accountability are alive, and they represent a force that even the most powerful leaders must reckon with. The coming weeks and months will reveal whether these protests evolve into lasting change or are quelled by force. But the message is unmistakable: Putin's worst fear has arrived, and it is rooted in the voices of his own people.